As I think about the Ten Commandments, I saw a couple stories, one of which involved a couple who hadn't been to church in a long time, and the pastor was surprised to see them because he hadn't seen them in so long. And as they're going out the door, he's shaking their hand, and he says, "Well, we'd like to see more of you." To which they replied, "Well, we don't come to church very often, but we do keep the Ten Commandments." And the wife replied, "Yes, he keeps 4 of them, and I keep the other 6. Okay, that's all right. Well, there's one more story. A comedian is not my second job, so don't worry about that. But these are to get you to relax a little bit. But one child is in Sunday school, and the teacher was asking them if they knew what the Ten Commandments were. And of course, they all were trying to understand and remember them. And so the teacher said, "Well, who knows what the 5th commandment was?" And they said, "Well, that's honor your father and your mother." And then the teacher asked, "Now, is there any commandment on how to treat your brothers and sisters?" And one little boy, without missing a beat, said, "Yeah, thou shalt not kill." So I wonder when the first time you began to learn the difference between right and wrong was. How old were you when you began to discover that there were some things you were never to do and other things that you always should do? Who taught you those truths? Who gave you your moral compass? For thousands of years, society and culture have attempted to define what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior for their cultures. In fact, as early as 1700 BC, laws were written by one of the rulers in Babylon that we know as the Code of Hammurabi. And these rules and laws, a lot of people say, well, the Ten Commandments aren't special because there was these laws written before them, but they don't resemble each other at all. In fact, the Code of Hammurabi is written from a perspective of a ruling class that oppresses everybody else and gives rights to those who are in power. But most laws have harsh penalties associated with them. But then in 1300 BC, something amazing happened. A large group of ethnic slaves who had escaped from Egypt under an amazing set of circumstances. We've been talking about that. An adopted son of Pharaoh returned to Egypt and challenged the king by speaking in the name of his God that had told him to rescue the Hebrew slaves of Egypt. And after a series of signs and wonders that are still unexplained to this day, the Pharaoh reluctantly agreed to let the slaves go, and they headed east towards the Red Sea and towards modern-day Palestine. And it was in this journey towards Palestine that God began to reveal himself, and on a mountain that we call Mount Sinai, he dictated 10 words or commandments that are written on stone that would change the course of human history. Today we refer to those commandments as the 10 Commandments, and they form the bedrock of the Judeo-Christian tradition. In fact, they form most of what we understand to be our Western civilization. 2 weeks ago, we covered the first 4 commandments, which dealt with our relationship with God, the vertical relationship that we have with God. And over the next few weeks, and of course after Easter, we'll talk about the last 6, which define our behavior towards each other. I remember in high school listening to recordings by Bill Cosby. This is before he had all the scandals. But we actually had record players where we had his jokes that were on vinyl. Anybody else remember that? Yeah. And we would listen to those for hours because, I went to a military school, so we were cut off from the rest of the world. But we would just sit around in groups just laughing. But I remember one of his favorite stories was the interaction with his mother and about getting caught doing things that he shouldn't have been doing. And he would say in his most powerful mother's imitation, "I brought you into this world and I can take you out of it." Moms, did you ever feel that way with your kids? Well, your first point for this morning is that parenting is not for cowards. Parenting is not for cowards. Believe it or not, that's also the title of a book written by Dr. James Dobson. Most of you probably have heard about him. And if you're not a parent, or you are, and you've never read it, I urge you to read it. And while it won't solve all your parenting problems, it might help keep your sanity as you're raising your kids. But one thing that I noticed among millennials, that's people that are in their 20s and early 30s, most of them in their 20s, what we call millennials, is that they're having fewer children, or maybe not even having any children. In fact, the birth rate in America is at an all-time low. There's many reasons they give us: finances, time, energy, along with the excuse that our world is a terrible place to raise a child. But the truth is, it's never been a better place to raise children. Mortality rates are the lowest in history. Prosperity is at the highest worldwide in human history. It's actually the best time to raise children, and yet we find reluctance. I have to believe that the reason that millennials choose not to raise children has to be from both pessimism as well as selfishness. But just like the title of Dr. Dobson's book, maybe they're just afraid. They might remember how they tortured their parents with demands for nice clothes and a nice car, the right to date at 11 years old, or racking up college debt on their parents' dime. And they might be even afraid that their own children might repeat these deeds on them. And so if you're trying to guess what today's message is about, it's obviously about the fifth commandment. And Jennifer read the New Testament interpretation of that. I'm going to read the original text. Honor your father and mother, so that your days may be long in the land the Lord your God is giving you, out of Exodus 20. I like the promise that's associated with this commandment. It's the only commandment that contains a promise from God for those who obey it. Understand, back in those days, if you were a disobedient child, Titus, I'm kidding. Your parents could bring you to the city gate and say, our son is a disobedient fool. He refuses to submit to our authority, and then the town would stone him to death. Yeah. That would be a pretty significant incentive to not be dishonorable to your parents. But it's, seriously though, this commandment is on, well, there was 2 tablets. Each of them had 5 commandments on it. So this was on the first tablet. It's actually the first commandment that is written after, the first commandment on our relationship to one another. The first 4 were to God, and it's the very first of the next 6 that relates to our relationship to each other. Why do you think God ordered it that way? Why do you think he put family first? Above everything else, all the other relationships, why do you think he put family first? I believe that it's because family is the building block of a healthy society. And there are several things this commandment means for us. Respect for authority is learned first in family relationships. Failure to learn authority in a family will lead to a failure to respect authority in society. That's why inner city youth have great trouble when they don't have parents involved in their lives, and they begin to just disrespect the law because they have no respect for authority whatsoever. In fact, the Bible tells us in the last days there will be a lack of respect for authority. Do you find that around us? Do you look and you see this in other places? Hopefully not in Idalia, but in some places there's a rampant lack of respect for authority. I overheard a teenager say to another, "I can't wait to get out of my house. I hate doing what my dad tells me to do. When I'm 18, I'm going to join the Marines." You got the irony of that, didn't you? He's going to get a serious dose of authority there. This commandment is one of only 2 out of all the 10 that is not written in the language of prohibition. In other words, thou shalt not. This is written in the language of commandment to actually do something. And that was why I call it a positive commandment. Do you know what the other commandment to do something was? Remember the Sabbath. Take your rest. And this one, honor your father and mother. It's also the only commandment in the entire, out of the 10, that tells us to honor something. Now here's a nuance to this commandment. It doesn't tell us to love our parents. Did you notice that? It says, honor your parents. We're commanded by the Bible to love God, to love our neighbor, to love the stranger, to love Jesus, to love our enemy, but nowhere we're told to love our parents. Now, isn't that strange? Not really. Because if we already love them, you can't be commanded to do so. And if, for some reason, if your parents were so horrible that you couldn't love them, commanding you to do so would not change your behavior. And so instead, God in his infinite wisdom understood how complex child-parent relationships are, both emotionally and mentally, and designed a commandment that allowed us to, outside of being commanded to love, command us to do something that is much more integral, much more basic than even love, and that is honor. And I believe it's more important to honor our parents than to actually love them. If you honor them, it becomes possible to love them. But if you do not honor your parents, it is impossible to love them. Our society is not dependent on children loving their parents. Our society is dependent on children honoring them. So we're going to talk about honoring in a few moments. But if you have ever observed Asian culture, anybody here observed Asian culture? People from Japan or China or anywhere in Southeast Asia, how children honor their parents. They have a culture of honor in Asia. They have the children are raised to never dishonor their parents in any way, shape, or form. Their conduct is to always save face and to keep their parents in such esteem that they never bring shame on their parents. Now, wouldn't that be a wonderful value to teach to our children, to never bring shame to you? However, as some Asian people have come to America and raised families, they found it very difficult in our culture to raise their children with the same respect and honor. Our secular society has lost its value of honor. Now, sometimes parents do horrible things, unforgivable things to their children, and still that child is bound to honor his parents, not because of who they are, but because of the position they hold as authority figure in the family. You can liken it to a president that you don't like. I'm not going to go there, though. But you may not respect that person, but you're still required to respect the office that person holds. You understand that? That's how we look at honor, is you respect. It's kind of you respect the office even if you don't like the person. I personally observed what honoring parents looked like at an early age. I remember my father sometimes grumbling about his mother and how he and his 3 brothers had to support her financially for her entire life. You see, his father had divorced his mother to marry another woman and left her without any means of support. And so the 4 boys, as soon as they got out of the military, sent her checks every single month to support her. And even though I heard my dad complain, it was what he did that impressed me. He visited her almost every single week and spent time with her. He honored her even when it wasn't easy. I was reading a Jewish rabbi's take on this commandment when I came across this stunning quotation. I want to share it with you. A standard feature of totalitarian regimes is the shifting of children's loyalty and obedience from their parents to the state. In such countries, children are encouraged to inform on their parents about the government and differences in ideology from the norm. That was written 50 years ago. We see it happening now. Our own nation has seen a breakdown in the nuclear family through sexual revolution, divorce rates, blended families, absentee parents, TV babysitting. You know what I mean by TV babysitting? Yeah. We leave them home, let them watch TV while we do other things. And now schools assuming the roles of parents. And parents lose their historical and biblical role of honor in our society as a consequence. We already know that there's damage to a child's identity when there's a loss of one or more parents in the home. And the absentee parent has the exact same effect on a child. Healthy parent-child relationships are essential to a child growing into an interdependent, emotionally stable adult. So here's the big question. How do we honor our parents? If you're a teenager, this should be the number one question going through your mind. Well, how can I honor my parents? I don't get along with them, right? We have friction sometimes. They tell me to do things, or I don't like going to the mall with them because I want them to stay 20 feet behind me because I don't want to be seen with them. I see guys nodding, yeah. As a teen, how do you honor your parents even when you don't get along with them or you don't like them, especially because of the role they play in your life? How do you honor them? How do you keep that honor intact? Honor means to hold in high regard. It means to respect, appreciate, and fulfill obligations. So if you want to write if you're a teenager and you're keeping notes, write on the corner of your bulletin insert, write these words. Honor means to respect and appreciate. Respect and appreciate. I was reading an article this week about relationships, and I was shocked to find that honor is what is considered a key pillar to healthy relationships. And so if you're married, how do you honor your spouse? Honor is a huge aspect of relationships. How we honor one another is how we build healthy relationships. And so if you have the cornerstone of honor in a relationship, you have a lot of the ingredients necessary to make that relationship successful. It's the loss of honor, the loss of respect, the loss of appreciation, the loss of obligation, fulfilling of obligations to one another that begins to depreciate our relationships and causes them to erode and fall apart. And so God wants to start with the idea of honor. If you start there, you build on top of honor, everything else begins to build on that cornerstone. Think about what we call a person of honor. A soldier who has a person of honor. It tells us something about his character, doesn't it? About his behavior. He acts according to the highest principles, not according to just how he feels. Now, teenagers, you guys are emotional beings, highly emotional beings, right? Am I right? Yeah, exactly. Whether you want to admit it or not, you're highly emotional beings. You act on how you feel. But honor says I act according to principle, not how I feel. And so I act according to what the best principle is, the good, instead of just how I feel. I feel like screaming at my parents. I feel like slamming the door, but what do you do instead? You close it quietly, you swallow that anger, and you act according to honor instead of according to how you feel. And so when we treat each other with honor, we treat them with respect and appreciation, even when they don't seem to deserve it. Even when our parents don't deserve it. I mean, sometimes our parents don't deserve it. I guarantee you, I was a jerk sometimes to my kids. Really? Yeah, I'm sure you were too, at some point. But here's about what honor does. Honor lifts one another up. You know, this church, I've noticed, has a culture of honor to it. Each year we honor teachers on Recognition Sunday. And oftentimes I see people sending cards of appreciation to one another because they've taught Sunday school or they helped in Vacation Bible School. And I see thank you cards being sent. Those little things of appreciation create a culture of honor where we lift one another up and say, you know what, I value you because you did something. I value you just because of who you are. That's honor. It's always aware of appreciating. It focuses on the other instead of just oneself. Now, obedience can be an act of honor, but it's not the same. You know, if a child obeys their parents, they might be obeying out of fear of punishment, right? Not because they want to honor them. But listen to this. When a child speaks to his peers about his parents, he can dishonor his parents by speaking negatively about them. Have you ever, kids, teenagers, you ever spoken negatively about your parents to your peers? Good, I'm glad to see the nods no. In fact, I never dared to refer to my parents back in the time when I was growing up because it was a common term of disrespect for parents. Anybody know what it was? Well, you called your father or your mother, my old man, my old woman. That's what people would call their parents, and it was a sign of disrespect. And I would never allow those words to cross my lips because I just knew that was dishonoring, and I would never have done that to my parents. You know, I may have disobeyed my parents, but I hated to disappoint them. You know, boys and girls, teenagers, you may disobey your parents, but I hope the biggest thing in your heart is never disappointing them. And some of you have elderly parents. Probably you have the same view towards them. You never want to disappoint them. Obviously, you can't live their dreams for you. You learned that a long time ago. But you don't want to disappoint them. Well, my father tried to talk me out of entering the ministry because he believed it was a less lucrative job than being a CEO. I didn't argue with him. That would have been dishonoring as well. I was an adult. I could make my own decisions. But I did invite him to my graduation ceremony at seminary, which he didn't come to. But I did send him the video of the ceremony, which he watched. He was proud of me making my own way, even though it wasn't his way. So it's possible to make your own way in life and still honor your parents. Your parents want the best for their kids. They want their best for their teens. And unfortunately, we don't know that you might not live up to their expectations, but they just honor them in whatever you do. Even if you choose a different path than what they want for you, make sure you honor them. Many of us here have elderly parents, to which I've seen many of you give great honor to. Some of us may have had parents here who were hard on us, or who gave us difficult expectations, or who hurt us, maybe even neglected you. But that still doesn't relieve you of your responsibility to honor them. I believe that when you honor our parents, when you and I honor our parents, especially when we feel like they least deserve it, we release a gift of God towards them. When we forgive a parent for the way they treated us or didn't do something they didn't do for us, we release hope in their lives. And there's a power to that gift that can't be overstated. If a parent has done something horrible to you, it doesn't mean that you have to subject yourself to being treated that way, but you can still honor them. One thing that I did shortly after I became a follower of Christ, is I felt a need to write a letter to my mom telling her how much I valued and appreciated in detail what she had done for me over my childhood and young adult life. And it was a several-page letter. It was handwritten, and I mailed it to her. When my mom died in 1989, my dad told me that letter meant more to her than anything I had done my entire life. So I'm going to give you an assignment, at least teenagers, but maybe some of you who have parents, elderly parents, is to take a few moments and write a card or a letter to them. Just take those few moments and do that this week. Take some time and write out those things that would bring honor to your parents that maybe you have never personally said to them. Tell them what's impacted you. Tell them how you value them or how much you appreciate certain things that they've done. I encourage you to take this step of honor. You might be 60 or you might be 16. No matter how old you are, if your parent is still living, you have the opportunity to give honor to them. And I encourage you to do that. Would you try doing that this week? All right. Let's take a few moments and pray. Well, Father, you are the supreme parent of all. And you've shown us what a perfect father can be like. And none of us had perfect parents. And none of us were perfect parents. But that isn't the point. He gave us this commandment because honor is the cornerstone of life. It's a cornerstone of relationships. And if we can't honor the most basic relationship we have, we'll never have relationships of value and meaning unless we start there. So God, I just pray that each person here who has been struggling with honoring, or maybe has never even given it a thought, might consider it today as a way to just to bless a parent, a grandparent, someone who's invested in their life by giving them a gift of honor. Lord, I pray that we would also as a church continue to have a culture of honor, of appreciation, respect, and value for one another. I thank you that you are the greatest God of all. There's none like you, and that we can learn so much from your commands. In Jesus' name, amen. We are one in the